Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We're just a minute or two away from 9 o'clock, and I know a number of people are probably still logging in, but want to thank you for joining us today and joining the Olathe Chamber of Commerce in our Friday Zoom call. We are trying to bring information to our members that is relevant to today, and we have a wonderful call today. My name is Tim McKee. I'm the CEO of the Olathe Chamber of Commerce, and we'd like to welcome you. We have a wonderful presentation today from two of our superintendents of schools, and I'm going to allow our sponsor with McCowan Gordon, Chris Hess, to introduce them. But before I do, I also need to recognize Susie Carson with the Olathe Chamber of Commerce. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask our two superintendents once their presentations are done, we will try and get to your questions. If we're not able to get to your questions, please go to our website. We will edit this presentation and post that here in a few days, and hopefully most of those questions will get asked. But once again, thank you for joining us. And with that, I think we're right at 9 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris Hess with McCowan Gordon. McCowan Gordon's been a wonderful partner over the years with us, and they are our sponsor today. And Chris Hess, project executive, is going to
okay. That's okay.
Introduce or say a few words about McCowan Gordon and then introduce our guests. So Chris, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. As Tim mentioned, my name is Chris Hess. I'm a project executive with McCowan Gordon Construction. Have been an Olathe resident, Olathe South grad, the Olathe South Falcons, so awesome. I've had the privilege of being involved in the K through 12 market for over a decade. Been had opportunity to work with John Allison and his team on a few projects, and then got to know Dr. Burke through serving on the Olathe Advisory Board, EDC Advisory Board Council, and then also unfortunately weren't successful, but have pursued some work with them as well. But one thing I've learned in my decade plus of being involved in the K through 12 market is just what an unbelievably difficult role being a superintendent is. And I wanted to first say thank you for serving our community, both of you. You guys do a fantastic job. Superintendents are CEOs of complex organizations. You know, I'm fortunate I work for a great company, and really all we do is do construction. I don't want to oversimplify it, but you guys are not only responsible for educating our kids, but you're employing people that are in transportation, logistics. It is just incredible. And we're talking thousands of employees that are involved in our community, and you do a fantastic job. So that under the public eye, and then you mix in this year with an unbelievable world pandemic that has been dynamic at least. And I think what you guys have accomplished is amazing. And thank you for giving our parents and students the opportunity for, no matter how you feel about the issue, having a choice to do what you feel you're comfortable with and that you feel safe with. So thank you for taking the time today. We're excited to see what you think this year's going to hold. It will be an exciting year. And again, thank you for all you do and taking the time today to educate us.
Thank you, Chris, very much. And Tim, for the opportunity to be here this morning. But Wayne and I will kind of tag team. I drew short straw, so I get to go first. And we really want to make sure we're leaving time for everyone's questions. It has been challenging for school districts in particular during the pandemic as we're dealing with students and staff and the impact we know decisions around the schools have on our community, our business community. We're all intertwined. All of the Johnson County school districts have worked to provide, at least at the beginning of the school year, two options asking parents to make a decision for their student for at least a semester, and that would be participating in remote learning or in-person on-site learning, depending on what the needs of the individual student and family looks like. And there are a couple things to keep in mind when we're providing these two options. We have to do so with our existing staff. There's not an ability to go out and hire remote staff for that aspect. So that's a key that I know puts pressure on parents as we're in the middle of enrollment, trying to make a decision for their students, and in some ways asking very specific questions that we can't answer because the very specific answers will depend on how many students we have based on which choice they make. So it's different if we have 5% of our students enrolled in remote or 20% of our students enrolled in remote. And it gives us flexibility and the ability to look at it a little differently. The one thing I can guarantee for all the school districts across the state is that the remote learning will look completely different than it did last spring. If you'll remember, we literally had about 10 days to flip the entire educational process. Students, in many cases, without technology or access to the internet, our teachers not prepared to teach online because that's something they hadn't been asked to do before. So that's been a huge focus on all of our districts in getting that set up, the infrastructure. For example, in Olathe, we were 1-to-1 at the high school, 1-to-1 at the middle school with iPads, and 2-to-1 classroom sets for the elementary. So we had to shift and get everything in place so that when we get ready to start this school year, all of our students will have access to a device. We've worked with some of the internet providers, purchased hotspots, trying to make sure that those students that don't have access to the internet can still participate remotely. And the odds that at some point in time this school year that we're in a total remote situation, I think are probably pretty good. At least that's what we have to plan for as we think about it. We're going to plan for the worst and hope that we never have to implement those plans. But the other component is training staff, getting them up to speed as we think about remote teaching. It's a different skill set. It's a different approach. How is that going to look? And that's a reason that all the Johnson County school districts moved their start date back some, is to give us some extra time to be able to prepare. As we close enrollment, right now we're somewhere around 15% of our families have elected remote learning. And that's going to mean shifting 100 to 150 teachers from classroom instruction to remote instruction. And that's not a simple thing to do. And then have the time as we work to train all of our staff to be prepared for fully remote learning. So it is a lot of pressure on parents trying to make decisions about what's best for their student. As I said earlier, we ask that everybody make a commitment for a semester. And again, you can understand the logistics, trying to go back and forth when we reassign staff and have them focus and assign students to those classrooms. Shifts are just not really feasible for us as we work through those processes. So it will look very different than it did last spring. The other factor you'll hear school districts talk about, which is not a choice, but our preparation to potentially move to a hybrid scenario. So those students on site would transition potentially to a hybrid situation, which for most of the districts is somewhere between on-site 2 days a week and remote learning 3 days a week. So as we look at our hybrid, students would go, say, Monday, Tuesday, everybody's remote, and then the other half of students would go Thursday, Friday. And you'll see different configurations based on the district's capabilities and their staffing numbers. And that would be if we need to further reduce class size, if we see numbers continue to increase, if the as the county has recently made some recommendations to us for consideration. I'm sure we'll talk more about that in a minute. But that hybrid would be for the on-site. Our remote learners are going to continue remote. Their process, their format, the expectations for that won't change. We still have to meet 1,116 hours of instruction for the state. So with remote learners, there's attendance, there's the accountability of assignments, there's going to be direct instruction via the web for those students. But there's also going to be quite a bit of self-directed work that's going to have to be done. What remote learning won't be is sitting in front of a computer for 6 hours a day. We know that doesn't work. It's not effective, particularly with younger students. So it'll be several hours a day of potential direct instruction, and then there's going to be self-guided instruction, interaction with videos and assignments and those types of things. Parents are going to potentially be asked to have to keep a daily log of how much time their students spend and submit that, because that'll be part of the process that the state auditors are going to ask from all the school districts. Did you actually engage your students for the required periods of time? So that's the format that we've all been working on, and general structures that I would say are common between our school districts. And we can talk more about other specifics and answer questions, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Allison, and Tim and Chris and the Olathe Chamber. Thank you for including Spring Hill. There's still a few people out there that may not realize that our northern boundaries, and we have considerable amount of land that's actually in the Olathe city limits. And so thank you for including us. The thing that's great about having John go first is all I have to do is say ditto and I'm done. So thanks, John. Throw out a few little things for us. We're like everybody else. We were trotting along in the summer and the weather was getting good. And we know that kids are out playing baseball and softball and soccer, and everything was looking great for a full opening. And we know how to open school. And so with that aspect, we were gearing up and getting ready. And just like you, when the mask order came out, that was something that we had to adjust to and get ready. We were working on reopening plans, and then the Kansas State Department of Ed put out a navigating change plan. And so we started adjusting our plans to that as well. And then not too long after that, the governor made a decision to move back the reopening. And then as you well know, the state board made a change and then went back to local control. And then each of the school districts had to go to their school board to make a decision on what was going to happen. So we're bouncing along just like you guys are, that we're looking at different aspects of it. One of the things that we're doing as a county and the superintendents is, you can take a piece of paper and put crisis and frustration, or flip over the piece of paper and write the word opportunity. And I can tell you all the districts are looking at this as an opportunity. We're going to do what we've always done and make sure that we provide the best education possible for every kid in Johnson County. And one thing I can tell you is, especially as a superintendent of a small district, I love the fact that we're being included in the conversation. Not too many years ago, there was a lot of inter-county competition, and we didn't share. And that hurt kids throughout the county. And so now we meet quite often, and we're willing to share because we want to make sure that all the kids get as much of an opportunity as we can. Spring Hill specifically, we're a lot like Olathe. Our 6 through 12 has a one-to-one device, and it's a MacBook Air, and we're very proud of that. And our elementary students had we were one-to-one in the building, but we really didn't send those devices home. Looking at possibility of the future of having remote learning, we have made plans to be able to make sure that we get that device to the families and that they have that at home. Some of you may have heard Spring Hill has some internet issues, and we are working with the city and the county to try to overcome that. We bought hotspots, and we're reaching out to our parents to, if we have to go to remote, what we can do to help them be able to have access to their kids. Recently, all of our schools, I'm using the wrong terms here, but we've created umbrellas so that people could come to our parking lots and be able to have access if they don't have that at home. And we've enlarged that so more people can come in. We're just like everybody else. Safety is very important to us. We're doing a lot more cleaning, different measures on that. I believe we all have foggers, and we're doing all kinds of different things now to secure our buildings and prepare for students to come back. Just like John, we had the optional remote learning that we are offered out to our parents. Our initial surveys came back at about 14%. And so with that, we're going to need to make adjustments for our teachers as well, so that some teachers can move to optional remote learning, and then that parents have a choice. Hybrid, that's something that we were all actually hoping to avoid, to be honest. The fact that a kid is in school for a few days and then home in a few days, we understand for parents, that's tough. And that who's going to watch their kids because they still have to go to work. And so I know that hybrid is something that is kind of a last resort for some of us, if at all possible. But again, we have to look at the county guidelines. The Johnson County Health Department's been working with us, and our districts are big, strong believers in doing what our local health officials recommend to us. And so we're preparing for that as well. I know that I just had I have a meeting that I left, and when this is over, I'll go back to, and one of the big things that we're discussing today is hybrid. Whether it's that AB schedule where it's at AA, and then have a remote learning day and a BB schedule, whatever that looks like, we're bringing our staff in. One thing that I'm sure that John can share with you as well, you can have your administrative staff start putting a plan together and everything looks just the way you want it. And then all of a sudden your principals come in and they start saying, that's not going to work for us. And when that happens, you have to adjust. And now they're bringing in leadership teams that's full of teachers. And some of those teachers are saying, that plan looks good, but it won't work for us. And so that's one of the things that we have to do constantly is adjust. And I know that's frustrating for parents because as a parent, you want to know exactly what's going to happen right now. And the problem is we can tell you exactly what we think is going to happen right now, but as we bring in more staff and more expertise, those change, and it changes quickly. And you have to listen to the people that are boots on the ground, your experts, your teachers. And if we force something upon them and they know it's not going to work, the chances of that being successful, it lessens and lessens. So we have to listen to them and make adjustments. And I know that one of the things that we're asked constantly is what happens if a student in my school gets COVID? And right now we can tell you we are working very closely with the Johnson County Health Department. We're having weekly meetings with them, and we have brought that concern to them, and they are aware of that. And I appreciate that them giving us some guidance, but just like a lot of things, as they learn more about this virus and everything that goes with it, they're adjusting what they're telling us. And so right now, the best thing I can tell you is if we have a COVID case in our school, we're going to contact the Johnson County Health Department. We're going to ask them what advice that they can give us. We're going to look at contact tracing and figure out who all's been exposed and then make notifications and go from there. And so I'm just like John. I would love it if the cases went down, a vaccine was found, and we could all start school on the first day with all students in and not as many worries. But again, we know that that's probably not feasible. So as we continue to move forward, we have the options of students coming in. We have options of the remote learning, and agree with John, the direct synchronous learning is really good, but you can't just do that for 6 hours. The kids need a break from that. I don't know about you, but I have been in so many Zooms meetings in the last 3 to 4 months that I'm zoomed out. And trying to do that to a young student is not going to be very successful. So again, it's going to keep evolving and keep changing. But again, I go back to it's great that the districts are sharing information. We may not all make the exact same decisions, but with that, we at least have all the same information. And so I think I've talked enough. So John, I'll turn it back to you, or Tim, whatever questions you have for us.
Can touch on a couple other areas. As Dr. Burke said, one of the issues we deal with is the constant change. And we all know this is an ever-evolving situation, but to give you an example, just this week alone, the CDC revised their guidelines for schools. The Kansas Health Department has given us new guidelines around quarantining and some of that Dr. Burke was addressing, what to do if there is a positive COVID confirmation in a classroom or a building. And then Johnson County Department of Health and Environment has just within the last couple days given us some gating criteria to consider. And they're looking at two measures: what the 14-day rolling average has been for the number of cases and the percentage of positive. And they've helped look at all the science and given us some recommendations. Something every district's going to have to assess. They're not mandated requirements, but they're the best recommendations based on the current science, which is something that we've relied on them. That's not our expertise or role. And then over really the next week or two, our school boards are going to have to assess that and what that means. And based on that gating criteria, they've made recommendations as numbers go up. Of course, the options for schools become more restrictive. So one of the key pieces is, as a community, if we want schools to have some semblance of normalcy, we've got to do our best to push those numbers down, wearing the masks, social distancing, being smart about what we do, so that we're not in a position where we have to look at more restrictive aspects for schools and limiting opportunities for our students, as well as the yo-yo effect that could have on families. You're planning on your student being at school every day, and now they're not. And that's going to have a lot to do with how we try to work with this as a community. When it comes to many of the safety aspects that we've planned about, social distancing, of course, is key. However, you've got to remember, schools were not designed for social distancing. So in the configuration of the classroom, the age of the school will determine how much social distancing can occur. The health department is telling us that you hear 6 feet as kind of the number, but that really anything between 3 and 6, particularly if students and staff are masked, that's enough social distancing. You're providing distance there. The mask component is still a topic of discussion. The governor's executive order, we're all looking and following that at this point in time. There may be an opportunity that more discussions will be able and changes to be made at the local level, which Johns County Health is given us some ideas around masking. But that's also key when we talk about a case breaking out in a classroom. Part of their contact tracing will also, as they've given us an example, if everyone in the class that came in contact with that individual had been masked appropriately, had practiced social distancing as much as possible, had limited exposure, that doesn't mean that anybody else in the class may be required to quarantine. If no one's wearing a mask and you're not social distancing, that changes that equation. So there's a lot of the what ifs and particulars that they'll have to work through, just like they will in assisting businesses, and who in families might have to quarantine or not, and how that will impact us as we move forward. So the masking is going to be important, the hand sanitizing, the social distancing. You know, we've had to work with even developing new ways that students will come into school. In a typical morning, students get off the bus, they get dropped off, they may go into the cafeteria or the gym, and it's kind of where they'll do the meeting of the day and set the tone, and all those students will disperse to class. We're not going to be able to do that anymore. They're going to have to go directly to their classes, and just basic things like transition periods, one-way hallways and stairwells, all those types of things are considerations we've had to put in place to try to mitigate the risks as much as possible for students when they come to school. Transportation is another. Early on in May, CDC was recommending the social distancing of 6 feet, which would have meant on a full-size bus, we could have put about 13 students on. That for Olathe meant we needed to add about 350 buses. You can't do that. They've since revised that and give us some guidance. So we'll load from the back forward, so students aren't walking past each other as they go to select seats. Ask families to sit together. Everybody will be masked. There'll be a new process as well, just for something like transportation. So all of those efforts are done to try to mitigate the risk as much as possible, reduce the possibilities of COVID outbreak, and allow us to continue to provide on-site education for the families that choose to do so.
Yeah, I'll throw in a couple of things. One of the things that you do for safety that sounds like a great idea causes some issues of safety in another area. And John talked about the different entry points into a school. One of the things that we all did is minimize our entry points for school safety, keeping a better idea of who's in your district or who's in your building, who's walking around, that sort of thing. But now that we have to take temperature checks, you have some multiple issues there. You don't want to have large amounts of kids sitting out in the front of the building waiting in line, trying to get into the building. So you have to make some adjustments in one area for safety so that you can get more kids in the building and not have them clogging up or having big groups. But at the same time, you have to be even more aware of those different entry points and being able to protect your kids. I know that bus issues a really big, I'm trying to be careful how I say this, but it's one of those things that people get really concerned about. And I understand, my kids used to ride the bus too. I can tell you our bus company is going to do everything that they can to make sure that when the kids come on, just like John said, they're going to load in the back. They're going to have the kids wearing masks. They're going to try to spread them out as much as they can on the buses. Our bus company is going to have temperature checks, and so that they can do that immediately. But with that becomes another problem. Well, what happens if a kid who's getting on the bus has a fever? You can't just stick a student on the bus and put all those other kids on there and isolate them and drive around and then drop them off at school and make a decision. Our bus company is working with us so that if a student does have a temperature, that we're able to contact parents immediately, hoping that the parents are able to come get them. But if not, we've got another bus that's going to go pick up those kids and be able to social distance the kids on that bus until we can get them to a safe area and get them to their parents. So that's one of those little things that so many of the questions that we get asked isn't just a straight automatic answer because it depends. One of the things I get asked a lot is, what happens if a teacher gets sick? And there's a difference between the teacher getting sick and a teacher getting COVID. If a teacher gets COVID, then again, we have to walk through the Johnson County Health Department plan and follow that. But that teacher might be able to go home, and if they're asymptomatic, they might be able to continue to teach their kids. We would try to hire a sub, get a sub in there, and then have that teacher provide lesson plans. And that teacher might even be able to remote into that classroom. If that teacher is completely not able to function, then again, you would have to get a sub. I know one of the things that we get asked over and over is, how are you looking at subs? And are you able to get them? We're a much smaller district, but right now we've got about the same amount of subs signed up right now as we did last year. So we're very fortunate that. I don't know that everybody is having the same thing, but I can tell you that when we bring our subs in, we're walking them through the same safety training and precautions that we're doing with the regular staff, because we want them to feel safe and we want them to be able to come into the building understanding that we're cleaning every night. We're going to do everything we can to protect them as well as other people. So I know subs is a big point of concern for a lot of people. But right now, at least in Spring Hill, I can't speak for Olathe, but at least in Spring Hill, it seems like we have a good amount of people that are wanting to do that. So to be honest, we're still looking at this as an opportunity. We may figure out new ways to educate kids, and we may figure out new ways to do it better. I know that as a parent, I've got 2 older kids, and I'm concerned about them leaving and going back to college and all the precautions that they're taking. So I can assure you, John and I are both parents, and there's never a time that we're making a decision for other people's children that we're not completely cognizant of the seriousness of those decisions and the fact that people's most precious treasure that they have is being sent to us and want us to protect them. And that's part of the reason that we are offering multiple options for families. So I've kind of rambled on a little bit, but hopefully we're answering some questions and getting. I did see one question on here that asked about printers at home. I can't speak for Olathe, but if we're doing the optional remote learning, or even if we get to the remote learning, we're not going to ask for printers to be at home unless families want to print something and keep it for themselves. Trying to limit paperwork that goes back and forth to the schools is something that's of a concern to us. And so we're going to do work on systems that students can post their work and teachers can access that and print that, or not print it, but access it, grade it, and give commentary back to those students. But as of right now, we're not planning on requiring printers at home. John, I don't know how you guys are following on it.
No, we'll be electronic submission, so that we're not. You don't need a printer at home, and we don't want to try to work on collecting the paper pieces. We're not quite as fortunate as Spring Hill when it comes to substitutes. We normally have somewhere between 500 and 600 folks on our sub list. Many of our most regular substitutes are retired teachers. So based on being in a higher risk category, so far we've got probably about 100 of our substitutes that have notified us that at least for the first semester, for the first 9 weeks, they don't plan on substituting for us. And that's a key piece. What will push us to remote learning for all students, in my personal opinion, faster than anything else, is going to be the situation that develops with our adults. When you don't have bus drivers, you don't have cafeteria workers, teachers. If, example from in one building, we had an administrator that tested positive for COVID, and it meant that their 2 assistant principals as well needed to quarantine until they're, and they'd been tested. They were negative, but they still had to quarantine. We lost an entire administrative team for 10 days. So those are the pieces that will create problems for school districts beyond just students. Will be the impact on our adults and our ability to backfill and provide coverage during periods of potential quarantine. And that's something we're all dealing with, and I'm sure you all are with your businesses as well, and trying to be strategic. We're not bringing in we have 4 payroll folks. We don't bring them in at the same time. We rotate when they're actually in the office right now, so that we don't lose an entire payroll department at one time. that's great when you can do it, but that's not the way schools operate. You can't operate schools that way. And that's probably what sets us apart compared to other businesses, is just the structure and logistics of what we do and how we have to do it. So just a few challenges we're having to consider.
I see a question on there that I think I can try to answer, and then John can jump in. First of all, Spring Hill moved to 5A. I can tell you, my son, senior year, they moved to 5A, and we sure wish we'd have stayed in 4A, because we had a really good team that year, and we were, I believe, the smallest 5A in the state, and we sure gave them the best battles that we could in 5A, but being the small kid on the block, it was a little rough. But we do have teachers that work back and forth between the districts and live in different communities. The one thing that we're telling our staff is, please talk to HR. Please visit with them and talk to them about your concerns, and whether you have health issues or other concerns. I can't just give a blanket statement to everything, because every issue is a little bit different. And there are certain things that we have in place to work with them, but we certainly want to work with them. Our teachers are an incredibly important resource to us. Those people I said earlier, they're the ones boots on the ground. And John made a great comment. It's going to depend upon them. They're the ones that are in direct contact with the students, and we need to make sure that they feel safe, and we need to be listening to them as well. But at the same time, school districts do operate in a model where kids are in the building. And so we want to do everything that we can to provide for the safety and security of the students and the staff, with the understanding that we know that there's concerns. And so I very easily could have a teacher who lives in Olathe and works in Spring Hill, or vice versa. And that's one of the things that we're trying to be consistent across the districts, so that if one district is doing something, the other district is very similar. Doesn't mean we're going to do things the exact same way, because Olathe is Olathe, and they do what's best for Olathe. Spring Hill is going to do what's best for Spring Hill. But at the same time, we communicate a lot. And the one thing I would say is, if there's a teacher that has concerns, please contact our HR department and let them know now. I mean, it's easier to start working through problems in, I guess now we're almost in August, but it's easier to work through problems right now than it is to wait 2 or 3 weeks and start working through those problems or concerns. So I don't know if I answered that question very well, but I gave it a shot.
And I'll tack on a little there, and just the practical nature is, we're not going to be able to meet everybody's needs. Our teachers, as parents, are going to have to make some of the same decisions and under the same pressures as our community parents. Say if a teacher wanted to have their children remote at home, doesn't mean we can flex and allow them to teach remotely, or even teach from their home, as we did during the lockdown in the spring, because we're critical to our community, and providing instruction to students, to those that show up, is our job. So it does put a lot of pressure, as it does on everyone in our community, having to make those choices, and what options do you have based on your job. And so as Wayne said, we're trying to work with teachers with ADA issues and those types of things. We anticipate we'll need to transition 150 roughly teachers to remote learning. We've got about 400 that are interested through a survey and potentially teaching remotely. So you can see the desire versus the need that we have don't necessarily match, and that's going to we're just not going to be able to meet every employee's needs based on the jobs we need to do, and the function important function we play in our community.
Now, one of the questions talked about the mental health of our students. I can tell you that John and I are extremely concerned about mental health in any aspect. Zero Reasons Why is something that the Johnson County superintendent started working on because we had concerns about our kids. And to be honest, losing students to suicide is just devastating. And anytime that we can prevent children from killing themselves, or even adults from killing themselves, I think it's on all of us, though, to try to prevent that from happening. It's not just a school issue to prevent student suicide. It's a community issue. And that's what we started doing with Zero Reasons Why. There was a panel this week that I was fortunate to speak on and to listen to those kids talk. They want to come back, and we certainly understand that they want to come back. But we still have to make sure that we can bring those kids back in a safe environment. And I know it gets very political, and John and I are going to do our best to stay out of the politics. We have requirements that we have to follow. And I can tell you right now in Spring Hill, I've got parents that say, you should bring every kid back, you shouldn't wear a mask, and you should just, let's get on with our lives. I guarantee there's people that feel that way. There's other people in our community that are telling us right now that you should not be in school at all. You shouldn't even be thinking about it. And remote learning is the only thing that you should be doing. We're going to make the decisions based on what our district feels is best for our districts. And we're going to be talking to our school boards, and along with that, getting direction and advice from the Johnson County Department of Health. And so it's one of those things that not one size fits all, but we have to take all those things into consideration. But yes, our mental health of our students is very, very important to us. One of the things that John said earlier that I agree with, when we go to remote learning, it will not look like the fall or the spring continuous learning plan. And there is opportunities on that, especially with Zoom technology, that students can interact with each other. There's possibilities, even though it's remote, that they can do, and I'm talking remote learning, that they can do group projects together. So there are some opportunities. Is it the same as being face-to-face? No, it's not. But it is something that we can do better in the fall if we have to go to remote learning than we did last spring. So I'll leave it there, John.
I think if you look across all the Johnson County school districts, a huge focus of our plans, whether you're on site or choosing remote, will be a focus on social emotional learning and mental health. We anticipate the first several weeks of school potentially are really going to center around the needs of our students. They haven't been with us since March. Getting them used to the new protocols that we're going to have to put in place with masks and all those types of things. And we're all very focused, regardless of which option parents choose, on providing support for our students on that social emotional learning. That's been a key piece of each of our districts, as we've all had committed, not just to the teen suicide issue, but in general. It's part of the State Board of Education's adopted standards for school districts to focus on. And we know that's going to be critical as we transition back, particularly in tough times as we are now under a pandemic. And we've got to be able to address that, or education can't happen. So that's why we all know it's got to be first and foremost as we return as a huge consideration, and figuring out where our students are, as well as assessing their learning. Where are they, so we can now figure out, are there standards that we weren't successful in getting met last spring. And so that these first couple of weeks of school are probably not what your traditional thought of jumping straight into the curriculum, but we're going to have to ease into it, particularly around the social emotional learning, and then finding out where our students are and what their needs are, and then adapting so that we can help them the best way possible.
I'm gonna jump in on something real quick, and then John, I'll let you pick one of the next questions you want. But I know mask is an issue with a lot of people. One thing that I can say about that is wherever you fall on the spectrum, it's still a requirement for us, and we can't just ignore that requirement. But we had kindergarten roundup in our schools yesterday, and we did kindergarten roundup much different. We had much smaller groups. We brought the kids in and the parents. We were able to social distance quite a bit, and but the one thing I can tell you is all those kindergartners that came in were wearing masks, and it's one of those things that, as a parent, you can help us work with those kids if they're coming back in person. And kids are really resilient. They'll work with us. But that's one thing as a parent you can do to help us. I mean, if you're fighting it left and right, and then you send the child to school who's fighting it left and right, that doesn't help anybody. It's not going to be one of those things where we can just say, we don't have to do it anymore because it's a requirement from the state. And somebody can say it's not enforceable. When the state quits giving us funds in order to run our schools, it's enforceable. And so anything that you can do to help us, but again, it's like I said earlier, opportunity versus crisis. If parents look at this as an opportunity and help us with the masking, whatever your feelings about masks, but if you can help us with that, the kids will follow your lead. And I can tell you, in Spring Hill, there's tons of little guys and gals running around yesterday wearing masks, and they seem to be okay with it. I'm sure that nobody wants to be wearing a mask for 7 hours a day, and nobody's going to do that. We're going to have opportunities for the kids to get outside and to get those masks off and try to function as normally as we can. But anything you could do to help us on that would be greatly appreciated.
And speaking of masks, one of the aspects that we juggle and why the Johnson County Department of Health and Environment is so key to so many of our conversations is you do get conflicting advice. And because COVID-19 is so new, there's so little known about it, that's very understandable. So, for example, the masking order that the governor issued was different than the conversations that the Johnson County school districts have been having with our local health department, and that they felt like there were some ways in which you could be able to take the masks off. If students are more than 3 feet apart, if they're all faced in the same direction, if they're seated. That potentially was a time period where they could take their masks off for a period of time. So we kind of created the acronym Stand Up, Mask Up. So anytime you're up, you're moving, you're turning someplace else, you're masking up. That is not what was allowed under the governor's order. Good reasoning, science behind it. Her order, it takes it to the maximum risk mitigation. So those will be conversations that, as that executive order potentially expires, we'll be relying on the local county. Taking temperatures. One we'd had a lot of discussion here in Johnson County around. When you think of the size of our schools, if we've got 1,900 students coming into a high school, for example, what's it going to take in staff and time to take everybody's temperatures? The most accurate temperature is taken with the thermometer in your mouth. It's not with the handheld, which is what schools would have to use, handheld thermometers that hit your forehead. You come across a hot parking lot, your temperature is going to be elevated. If you've been wearing a hat, your temperature is going to be elevated. So the accuracy of those temperature checks on top of our discussions with the county was also around just the less than 50% of folks show, particularly our younger students, show signs of temperature if they have COVID. And you've already been contagious for several days before a temperature typically shows. So their feeling was we could look at spot checks and identifying students that we didn't think were feeling well, ask parents to take it at home. And that was probably a good mitigation strategy. That's not the order we're under right now, but that may change. So again, I just caution everybody, what we've talked about today, if we had the same conversation next week, may be different because we may receive different guidance as things develop. As other school districts across the country, some of them are starting as early as next week. As they reopen, I'm sure there will be lessons learned that health departments all over the country and on a national level, folks will be watching to see what happens. And I'm almost guaranteed that those experiences will help us redefine what we do when we open school in September.
John, I've been leading, so if you want to pick one of those questions, I'll let you go with it.
Actually, I haven't looked at the questions, so.
We could ask.
Gentlemen, yeah.
If you want to ask, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You guys have done a fantastic job. You've basically done my job for me this morning, asking the questions. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us this morning. A couple questions that we have. First of all, what was one of your guys' biggest challenge in putting together a plan to go back to schools that maybe parents didn't think about?
Go ahead.
For me, it's just the constant change. I mean, we would get a plan. We would feel very good about it. We got some input. We'd be ready to put it out. And then all of a sudden, something would come along and change everything. And one of the words that Dr. Randy Watson uses long is pivot. We have decided that the word pivot in Spring Hill is now profanity. You cannot use the word pivot anymore. But just the constant change. And I think it hurts our credibility with our community. You know, John and I can be working on this incredible plan. We put it out saying, this is what we're thinking about doing. Then all of a sudden a change comes by and we have to adjust. And then people get upset with us because said, well, you're telling us one thing one day and now you're telling it. We understand your frustration because we're living with that every day. So for me, that was probably the biggest thing is things just keep changing. It wasn't long ago that in June, I believe, we were looking at opening schools normally. No mask, no temperature checks, none of those things. That may not seem like very long ago, and it wasn't. And then we went from that to this. So think of all the steps that went in between.
I would agree with Dr. Burke. One of the problems with spin, we don't say pivot anymore. We talk about spinning because of the number of changes that constantly occur. I think one of the huge challenges for us is the logistics side of it. What we do is education, and while remote learning is very different than what we've talked about, basic teaching strategies and cooperative learning and those types of things that are such a regular component of best practice in education, we know we're not going to be doing this year, and it's going to have to look different. But that was the easy part. It's been the logistics, those constant changes. One decision has a ripple effect for 4 others. So just something like the temperature checks now has to create a whole different plan on how students are going to enter, maybe even start times, because the order is that the temperature has to be taken before they get into the school building. So and start class. So just all those things really have been a challenge for us. And like I said, we've had three different directions and guidance provided us this week in about a 72-hour time period that altered some of those decisions. So you're constantly going back to the drawing board, and it does frustrate parents who say, well, why don't we have this information? At least our perspective in Olathe has been, we want to be more assured that the information we're communicating has some chance of being consistent versus constantly sending oops, ignore the email from a week ago. This is what we're doing now. And then a couple of days later, no, sorry, that's not it. So I know it's created frustration with community on even our communication aspects. How often and what we're communicating has been a challenge for us to try to make sure that we're giving the best information possible and not just spinning with communication that's constantly changing and confusing folks.
Wonderful, thank you. I've got a question here about a matrix. Are you guys currently working on putting a matrix to kind of explain all these options between the remote, the hybrid, and the in-person so that parents can easily kind of see the differences?
I'd take this one, Wayne, and you tag team. The county health department released a matrix for schools to consider, and it's what I referenced early on regarding a couple key metrics and where community spread is in our community. And they based it on kind of a stoplight system, green, yellow, red, and then what they consider black. And that's when we're over 15% positive tests and our number of cases continue to increase. So they provided that guidance. I think there was a reference in one of the questions regarding Shawnee Mission. Shawnee Mission decided to remake that matrix and post it. That's not something that Olathe has done. I don't anticipate us doing that immediately. We're continuing to have conversations along with all the other Johnson County schools regarding the science behind that, the reasons for the recommendation, so we have a clear understanding. They've since, in follow-up conversations, since released that, have talked about how we might be able to modify it somewhat, becoming potentially more restrictive in some of that. So that's also something our school board, as representatives of our community, will weigh in. So I know for us, our school board meeting is August 6th, next Thursday, and that'll be a topic that we'll be addressing. And how does that look and how does it apply? And as we've learned more and have follow-up conversations with the county health department, I'm sure each of us will have that information that will embed into our plans. But again, we want to do it carefully, make sure we understand all of it, because it has some pretty significant implications for our communities and our families. I've had some questions about, well, I really don't want to have to make a choice between on-site or remote until I know how the district's going to adopt that matrix. My response to that is it really shouldn't impact your decisions. If you're going to pick on-site, you need to look at that matrix and see the potential of moving to a hybrid or even remote. But that's all going to depend on how this plays out in the community with the number of cases and percentage of positives and all that aspect. So yes, I would anticipate school districts addressing that, but we're going to do it with our due diligence and have that conversation within our community and our school board meetings. It would be my understanding of how the other districts are going to approach this.
Yeah, that's a great answer. The only thing I can add to that is we'll be talking to the Johnson County Health Department on Tuesday, and Spring Hill will have a board meeting on the 10th. So just like Olathe will be talking to their board, we'll be talking to our board on the 10th.
Wonderful, thank you. A few more questions. So high school has come up more than once, just with the block scheduling and the cafeteria eating. Is that, I know you guys are thinking about that. Is there anything you can say kind of about how that plan will look?
I can tell you with our high schools, we've done a modified block, which means on a couple days a week, students would go to 4 classes for a longer time period, and then the others, they had a full schedule. We will be moving to a full block schedule for at least the first semester, which means students will have 4 classes on Monday, and then they'll have another 4 on Tuesday, and they'll rotate. We had used we called it the Power 50 hour, which was a common lunch period where students could grab lunch, and then they had the opportunity to go talk to teachers, prep for tests. It gave them some flexibility during the day. We utilized the whole building for that. So that's most likely not going to be possible unless we have a larger number of high school students select remote. So you'd have, fewer students. So right now our anticipation is we'll go back to a more traditional lunch where there may be 4 or 5 lunch periods that students will rotate through so we can keep the space in the cafeteria and other areas at a minimum, reduce the transitions and passing of all the students at one point in time. So again, it's trying to maintain smaller groups, and an important piece, which I don't think we've talked about, is doing our best to maintain cohorts. So the county has encouraged us to do that. Much easier to do at the elementary school because you got a class and they're all together all day. You get to middle school, it's a little more challenging, but you have teams. It's the high school that becomes the bigger challenge, which is why we looked at block scheduling, fewer transitions, fewer classes, and students being in smaller cohorts. So if there is a positive case, the contact tracing is easier, and the number of folks that may have been exposed diminishes as well. So the high school is the bigger challenge. It's also the biggest challenge for remote learning because of the breadth of courses that we offer, and being able to provide all of those courses. It'll be tough to offer a German 4 remotely. So there will be some choices students may have to make, and that not every single elective is going to be a potential. But part of that is we got to see who's interested in it, and then go through what are all the course requests that they had and how that might look. So hope that answered the question.
Spring Hill is going to be a little bit differently. I think one thing we need to keep into perspective, I'll probably have about 900 kids at our high school. John's smallest high school is probably twice the size of my high school. Even though we're growing, there's a huge difference in numbers. So we're not going to block scheduling, but there is some things that we can do. One of the things that we're doing is looking at staggered start time for our high school kids. We may actually have our freshmen and sophomores, or our freshmen come in, then our sophomores, then our juniors, and our seniors. Lunch is one of those things that we've always had 3 lunch schedules, and we had Bronco Hour. And we're going to have to do away with Bronco Hour and maybe move it to 4 schedules. We have a very large gym complex, and so we can move our cafeteria, we can extend that seating into that so the kids have a much larger area to sit down and eat at. So there's and one-way passing. That's one of the things. The other thing is staggered passing, so that we may only have our freshmen moving at a time, and then our sophomores moving, and our juniors. Obviously, there's going to be conflict because we do have freshmen taking upper level courses, but there's a difference between moving a full class at one time and intermingling than having 3 or 4 kids over and intermingle. So there's different things that we can do that we're looking at that will change everything. We probably won't have a bell schedule anymore. It'll be more based on grade level and movement throughout the building. And again, outdoor classrooms. One of the things that we do have the ability is some of our classes have the ability to get outside. There's some adjustments that we made is if our band can't be outside, we do have a huge area that when we put our plays and things like that, we could take our band in there, spread them out, they could social distance, and then they could still perform. Again, anything that's projecting, whether it's singing or playing a musical instrument, those are things that you have to be overly careful about. But there's different things that we can do in order to provide for the safety of our kids. And then unfortunately, there may be some things that we can't do. And that's going to be a challenge as well. But I'm going to go back to something John said. There's a lot of districts that are going to be opening before we do. And we're big believers in learning from their mistakes. And any opportunity that we can get feedback from those districts, find out what went well, what didn't well, we can learn from that. And our boards have given us the grace to give us some extra time in order to start. The other thing is training. We're doing an enormous amount of training with our staff before this comes. And so we are going to have conversations that high school doesn't look like it would have looked last year. But it doesn't mean that we still can't give the kids quality education.
Yeah, that's good. That's a huge piece. It's not going to look the same. please don't anticipate it's going to. We are not going to allow before and after school clubs unless they can be done virtually. Again, it all goes back to that mitigation. We're focused on the academic piece and then trying to reduce mixture of the cohort and groups. So regardless of whether you pick on-site or remote, it's all going to look different this year.
Well, we are now 5 minutes over, so I will. I think we could go on all day long, and we're just getting, a ton of questions. We really, really appreciate you both joining us today. The challenge that you both have is unbelievable, and I do think that this will be very fluid as things go along. And obviously, we've got a lot of questions. We still have a lot of questions that we couldn't get to, from sports to and how that will look, and can you do remote learning and sports sports while you're doing remote learning. Also questions from teachers about safety and things like that. And we, as I said, we could go on and it's just a very challenging time. We really appreciate what you're doing for us and for our kids and parents and workforce training and everything. So please keep up the good work. Chris, we really appreciate McAllen Gordon, your sponsorship of this event. And if you are joining us on the call and want to go back, we will be posting this after next week. So thank you all for joining us. And with that, is there anything else, John, Wayne, that you'd like to say, or otherwise we'll just wrap up?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim, I would just say I would encourage everybody, both school districts have a website that have question and answers related to COVID. A lot of good information on there. So please read through that and see if that addresses some of the questions that have been asked.
Thank you very much. You guys have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Tim.